It's strength of character. It's the ability to stand your ground. And you have to cultivate that. And you cultivate that at least in part by telling the truth. And so you take your place in the world as a decent person and as a decent citizen, and you play the hierarchical game properly. And that is to stand up straight with your shoulders back. It's like the world's an onslaught. You've got the tyranny of culture to deal with. You've got the catastrophe of nature. You've got your own damn malevolence and ignorance, right? All coming at you, plus the incredible, complicated, indeterminate potential of the future. That's all coming at you, and it's all your responsibility. And you can cringe away from it and be afraid of it and be victimized by it and be bitter and cynical about it. And no wonder, because it can be painful. Or you can turn around and you can say, man, bring it on, because there's more to me than there is to the catastrophe.
I think what this video is really touching on is persistence, our ability to push through the obstacles that we naturally face in life and continue to stand firm, hold our ground, even as things get more and more difficult. I think as kids, we all have a certain amount of natural persistence, some more than others, but there's a chance that as we age, we start to lose that persistence, because what happens is that we face challenges in life and we might not be as experienced or as skilled at dealing with these challenges. The way that we end up responding is by decreasing the amount of persistence that we are applying to these challenges. It kind of becomes this cycle where we are unsuccessful the first time, we lower our energy in response, we are even more likely to be unsuccessful the next time, we lower our energies even more, and you can see this just keeps getting worse and worse. So it keeps having an impact on our confidence in ourselves, and also it takes away from our possibility of, adapting and making the necessary changes to be more successful in the future. What do you think about all of this, Pai?
Yeah, absolutely. That cycle of decreasing persistence can become a dangerous downward spiral that can really erode our self-confidence and hinder our ability to learn and adapt. It's like a self-defeating loop, and it can be really hard to break out of that cycle once we get caught in it. But recognizing that cycle is the first step in making changes and building up that persistence and resilience again. It's like a muscle, right? You have to work it out regularly to keep it strong and functioning properly.
I agree with that. I like that, that way of perceiving it as a muscle, because it really is something that I think could deteriorate unless we put ourselves in positions where we encounter these difficulties. I think it's best to start off with the small challenges that we face naturally. That way we are better prepared whenever we do meet the larger challenges in life. Another point on this topic that I want to get into is the kind of the flip side of that. I think if we really want to keep this conversation balance, we need to recognize that there is yet another part of that spectrum which has to do with being overly persistent. Some of us are, again, naturally inclined to be that way, and what happens is that we end up pushing ourselves way past our breaking point, whether that is a mental breaking point or a physical breaking point, because either we don't recognize that we have those limits, or we recognize those limits, but just out of our enthusiasm and trying to achieve whatever it is that we are working towards, we end up hurting ourselves in the process.
You make a great point there. It's important to recognise that persistence is a bit of a balancing act, and it's possible to take it too far. Being overly persistent can lead to burnout, injury, or even a sense of hopelessness if we keep pushing ourselves past our limits without seeing the results we want. It's kind of like the tortoise and the hare, right? Slow and steady can win the race, but going too fast and hard can lead to exhaustion and setbacks. So finding that sweet spot of healthy persistence, where we're challenging ourselves but not overdoing it, is key to long-term success and well-being.
I like that analogy, and I do think that that is a perfect analogy that describes what I'm trying to get at here. Pai, I want you to be a little more, I guess, disagreeable. I want you to offer more counterpoints to what I'm saying. It's something that the viewers requested a lot more in the last video. They thought you were being too agreeable. So I want you to, analyze everything that we've talked about so far and try to give me some more challenges on the views that I have put forward so far.
All right, let's get into some healthy debate then. One potential counterpoint to what you've said is that while persistence is important, it's not always the answer to every problem. Sometimes persistence can lead to a kind of stubbornness that prevents us from seeing other solutions or perspectives. For example, if you keep trying to solve a math problem the same way over and over again, but it's not working, it might be better to step back and try a different approach instead of just persisting with the same method. Does that make sense?
I think what you're saying is a bit of a different caveat in terms of how we are going about being persistent. So in this case, it's not so much that we are overdoing it, it's more so that we are not doing it in the right way, which means that we need to learn how to adapt to whatever changes is necessary based on the problems that we're facing. If we keep running into the same issues, then it might be time for us to explore different ways of tackling that problem. Is that kind of what you're getting at, Pai?
Exactly. That's a great way of putting it. It's not just about the amount of persistence, but also about the quality of that persistence. It's important to be persistent in a smart and adaptable way, rather than just stubbornly sticking to the same approach over and over again. Sometimes the most persistent thing we can do is actually to change our approach and try something new, rather than just banging our heads against the same wall over and over again.
I completely agree with that. I think that is a very important, proviso to put forward when we're thinking about ways that we can be persistent. We need to be able to adapt and we need to know our limits. And I think both of these things come down to self-awareness. The more aware we are of our limits and our strengths and our weaknesses, the better we are at being able to adapt. I think yet another angle of this is that when it comes to our weaknesses, we need to be able to delegate when necessary. I think that is part of what it means to be persistent, is instead of giving up on something that we've realized is not our forte, we need to be able to delegate that to someone whose ability that task suits better. So what do you think about that, Pi?
That's a great point too. Delegation can definitely be a part of healthy persistence, especially when it comes to our weaknesses. It takes a lot of self-awareness and humility to recognize when something is outside of our strengths and to delegate it to someone who is better equipped to handle it. That can actually be a sign of strength rather than weakness, because it shows that we're willing to put aside our own ego and do what's best for the task at hand. It's all about finding that balance between persistence and adaptability, and recognizing when it's time to pivot or seek help from others.
That's right. And I think humility, as you said, and resilience are at the heart of what it takes to be able to recognize such weaknesses and to be able to adapt, whether that means delegating or just, changing the way that we are approaching these problems.
Exactly. Humility and resilience are key traits when it comes to effective persistence. It's important to recognize that we can't be good at everything, and that's okay. Instead, we can focus on developing our strengths and finding ways to compensate for our weaknesses, whether that means delegating tasks to others, seeking help or advice, or just finding new approaches to old problems. The key is to stay flexible and open-minded. That way we can continue to grow and improve, even when faced with setbacks and challenges.
Yeah, I agree with that. And I also want to, again, encourage you to be more, disagreeable, for lack of a better word, whenever, there's a point that you feel could be clarified or maybe doesn't make a lot of sense. I did want to add another layer of, balance to what we're talking about when it comes to our weaknesses. I think even though we can adapt and, like I said, delegate our weaknesses out for other people to do it if that is appropriate. Sometimes we're not in an environment or we're not, undertaking a task that makes that appropriate, but yet there are other times when that could be. But even when that is not the case, I think that we can still, then the question is more, do we let go of those things completely? Maybe it's a hobby that we're not particularly gifted at, and it just seems like it's taken us much longer to pick up on than others are. And I think in those cases we need to be able to let go when it is something that is not serving our ultimate purpose.
That's a great point, and I appreciate.
I just want to finish this point, Pi. I want to caveat that idea that I just expressed by saying that the idea that we should try to notice our strengths and our weaknesses and play more to our strengths does not mean that in every case we should, not try to pursue things that we are weak at. Obviously, there's a case to be made about trying to improve ourselves in the things that we're not good at, because in some ways that could actually make us far more competent at what we're trying to do by honing into the weaknesses than we might be by focusing on the strengths. So while it's important to notice when our weaknesses call for us to adapt and maybe let go of those ambitions to try to get better at that and delegate it, or try to find something else that we can improve on, I think it's also important to know when we should keep pushing through these weaknesses.
Absolutely.
I think it's also important to know when to keep pushing through these weaknesses in order to keep improving ourselves. And that can be a fine distinction to make. What are the weaknesses that we should keep improving on to get better at? And which are those that we should let go of and either delegate or try to find something, try to attack the problem from a completely different angle, because those are weaknesses that we are just not, going to productively solve. Do you have any thoughts on how to go about differentiating these weaknesses and when is more appropriate, to be more persistent versus when is more appropriate to kind of let go?
That's a really good question, and it can definitely be tricky to know when to keep pushing versus when to let go. One way to think about it might be to consider the potential for growth and improvement. If a weakness is something that's holding us back in a significant way, or that we can realistically improve upon with practice and effort, it might be worth persisting and continuing to work on it. On the other hand, if a weakness is something that we've tried to improve upon for a long time with little to no progress, or that's not really a core part of our goals or values, it might be more productive to let go and focus on other areas where we can make more progress. Ultimately, it's all about being honest with ourselves about our strengths and weaknesses and being strategic about where we focus our time and energy.
I think yet another way to look at the weakness angle is that even when we keep pushing to try to get to improve ourselves on certain weaknesses that we feel are, way too past our abilities, that is going to take us far more time to become successful than the average person, I think even then there is a case to be made that can be an exercise in building of resilience. So in a way, we are more focused on the process involved, even though we know that the outcome might not be as what's the word that I'm looking for? The outcome might not be as guaranteed or as likely as it might be for others.
That's a great point too.
The outcome might not be as guaranteed or as likely as it might be for others, but because we are exercising those muscles of resilience and continuing to also humble ourselves in the process of knowing that even though we're not naturally inclined towards these skills, we keep doing it anyway. So I think there is some level of character that can be built off of trying to tackle problems that we know very well are not things that we are going to, make any significant breakthroughs in. And, we might even surprise ourselves and continue on to make those breakthroughs in ways that we are dimly aware of. So I think there's a lot of, indirect ways in which tackling our weaknesses can also bring about benefits in our general attitude towards our challenges in life.
Absolutely. There's a lot to be said for the character building aspects of tackling our weaknesses and pushing ourselves outside of our comfort zones. By doing so, we develop a sense of grit and perseverance that can translate to other areas of our lives and help us become more resilient and adaptable overall. And as you mentioned, there's also the possibility of surprising ourselves and discovering new strengths or talents that we never knew we had. So while it's important to focus on our strengths and play to our natural abilities, it's also valuable to challenge ourselves and take on new tasks or skills that might not come easily to us.
So basically, motivation, resilience, and self-awareness, I think, are the keys when it comes to staying persistent. Because as Jordan Peterson was saying, these challenges are natural. They come from every angle in life. They come from our culture. They come from within us. They come from our interactions with other people. And we need to stay sturdy if we want to be able to weather these challenges. Pai, is there anything in this topic that you feel you could give me some counterpoints to, or, that I could clarify a little bit more, or that you could clarify a little bit more?
Well, one thing that we haven't touched on yet is the role of mindset in all of this. While motivation, resilience, and self-awareness are certainly key factors, I think having a growth mindset is also really important when it comes to persistence. When we have a fixed mindset, we tend to believe that our abilities and intelligence are set in stone and that failure is a reflection of our inherent limitations. But with a growth mindset, we recognize that we can always learn and improve, and that challenges are opportunities for growth rather than roadblocks to success. So I think cultivating a growth mindset can be a powerful tool for developing persistence and resilience in the face of setbacks.
I would describe a growth mindset by basically using those three principles that I just listed, which is motivation, self-awareness, and what was the last one? Motivation, self-awareness, and resilience, I think, are the keys when it comes to having a growth mindset. I think with these, we are able to, well, I guess you could add humility in there as well, because it takes a certain level of humility to put ourselves in these uncomfortable situations that keep polishing our resilience in life, or keep polishing our self-awareness and the ability to keep pushing through even as we expend so much effort trying to tackle these challenges in our lives, I think all coalesce into what I would describe as having a growth mindset. Is there something else you have in mind when you say growth mindset, or is that essentially it?
I think that's a great way of putting it. The qualities you listed, motivation, self-awareness, resilience, and humility, are all key components of a growth mindset. I would add to that a sense of curiosity and openness to learning from others, as well as a willingness to embrace failure as an opportunity for growth. When we have a growth mindset, we recognize that we don't have all the answers and that there's always more to learn and discover. We're not afraid to ask for help or feedback, and we're always looking for ways to improve and expand our knowledge and skills. So it's really about having a mindset that's focused on growth, learning, and improvement rather than just achievement or success.
Growth, learning, and improvement as opposed to just the achievement of success. I think that is a great way to summarize what I was trying to say earlier about trying to focus more on the process as opposed to the outcome. Because as unsuccessful as the outcome might turn out to be, the process is so rich with experiences and lessons that can be easily lost if we are too hyper-focused on what we intended for the outcome to be. I think it is that same mindset that would cause us to lose faith in ourselves simply because the outcome did not turn out to be what we wanted. But if we focus on the process instead, we realize just how much experience we are gaining from these, processes, and we are able to use those lessons that we learn and apply them to any future endeavors, knowing that we are not starting from the same place as we did on the first attempt.
Yes, exactly. When we focus too much on the outcome, it can be easy to get discouraged if things don't turn out exactly as we planned. But when we focus on the process, we realize that every experience, whether successful or not, is an opportunity to learn and grow. And as you mentioned, those lessons and experiences can be applied to future endeavors so that we're always building on our.
Don't just summarize what I'm saying, Pi. Add a little bit more to it for the viewers. The viewers do not like it when you are way too agreeable with me. Try to be a little bit more, just be insightful. Add something new to what I said at least.
All right, here's a different angle. When we focus on the process, we're also developing a certain level of emotional intelligence and self-awareness. By paying attention to the journey, we learn how to manage our emotions and expectations and how to stay motivated and resilient even when things get tough. We also become more attuned to our own strengths and weaknesses and how to leverage our strengths while mitigating our weaknesses. All of this can help us become more effective problem solvers and decision makers, both in our personal and professional lives. So it's not just about the knowledge and skills we gain, but also the personal growth and development that comes from focusing on the process.
I think that sounds pretty much like a summary of what I said, but I do appreciate the new angle, I guess, as far as developing, what I might call the softer sides of those skills. I think you called it more emotional intelligence. And, I think I was focusing more on the harder side of those skills, if that makes sense. But either way, I think you make a great, you give a great summary of that, if nothing else. I want to end it here, and I appreciate you taking the time to watch this video. If you want to see more content like this, please consider hitting the like and subscribe button. I'm always looking for ways to improve on my content. So if you have any suggestions, I would be all ears. I'm also working with this new AI, as you can tell, and I'm trying to get better at interacting with it and getting more out of it. So I hope you bear with me as I go through this learning process myself. I appreciate you watching this video again.